The following is a presentation of Project Independence and WCWP. Project Independence is the Aging in Place initiative of the town of North Hempstead.
Welcome to Project Independence and You.
Good morning and welcome to Community Talk Radio. This is Project Independence and You on LIU Public Radio. I'm your host, Rebecca Miller, along with co-host Otto Lohse and show producer Kristina Lew. Kristina is also the Director of Senior Citizen Affairs for the town of North Hempstead's Services for the Aging Project Independence. Good morning.
Hey.
Good morning, Otto. We're very excited this morning. This is our first live Project Independence and You radio show in 4 years in this most lovely, beautiful radio station here at the LIU campus. So we're excited. We're also excited for our guest. This morning, we're talking to Ron Roel, a veteran writer, speaker, and radio show host of 45 Forward, a national internet radio show, discussing topics each week, focusing on positive aging through the second half of life. So Ron is also a longtime friend of Project Independence and will, of course, be speaking to us today about Monday's solar eclipse. Just kidding. Okay, all right. Had to throw that in there. We'll be talking a lot with Ron about his lengthy career and his book, Caregiving Navigator Long Island Edition. So welcome, Ron.
Thanks. Lovely to be here.
It's great to have you at our first live show, and it just kind of makes sense. So talking about, and your 45 Forward was a guest on at one point a few years ago.
That's right.
It was a great show, and was grateful to be on it. So let's just get right down to it. I mean, you have this incredible career. And you worked for many years as a business reporter on Newsday.
Right.
How did you transition into being kind of, in the aging business?
Yeah. Well, it started really when I was, I went to a seminar about, I saw someone was giving a seminar about financial planning. I said, well, let me just, check this out. And then in the course of the seminar, the speaker started asking the audience, well, how long do you think you're going to live? Well, how long do you think your grandchildren will live? And it became clear that it was going to be quite a different, era these days. And so it's an era of longevity. So that changes things a lot. And of course, it changes things financially. You have to think about how you're going to basically do well over the much longer period of time. But also, what else are you going to do? What other aspects of life do you have to deal with? There are health, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities and rewards. So I said, well, wait a minute. We're pretty much structured through the middle of life. But then after that, what now? People didn't have a sense. It's up to us. So I said, well, let me work on that, which that's where the idea of Act 2 came up. And of course, many of us now are in our Act 3s or 4s. So it's a progressive, set of chapters as we age. So that's how I got interested in it. And then I was one of the founders of the Act 2 section of Newsday in the early 2000s. And since I left Newsday years after that, I've maintained interest in this whole area because it's something that I find invigorating. Yes, I'm getting older. A lot of other people are, but we're still vital and they're still looking for solutions, looking for ideas, for challenges, and for resources. And that's how I kind of got intertwined with caregiving, because that became clear to me as we got older that was something that we really didn't have a good idea about. You had a pretty good idea of childcare, but then as we got older, it's like, okay, wait a minute, now we're taking care of children and okay, perhaps our older loved ones. How do we juggle this? How do we plan this? So that's how I got into this whole area.
I agree with you, what you said about Act 2, 3, 4. Just because you're 60 or 65, maybe that's Act 2. But then as you progress, depending on your own personal circumstances, you're getting into another act, if you will. A 65-year-old is not necessarily the same as a 95-year-old.
Right.
It's kind of like comparing a 5-year-old to a 35-year-old.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
Yeah. And people also need to realize in your 50s and 60s and even 70s, you still have ideas. You're still growing.
Right.
That was my basic premise, is that you can still grow and you can still be successful and look forward to life, not just the end of life. That's inevitable. But on my 45 Forward podcast, I've had many people who started entirely new careers in their 60s. and late 60s. I had a woman on who was a very successful management trainer who always wanted to, since she was age 9, to be a novelist. And that's what she became at 69. And also a successful one.
Yeah, I wanted to become a radio person at 67.
Exactly.
But I'm still here.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you're a radio person now. What are you talking about, Otto? Look
No, I
at you.
enjoy it, and I agree completely about trying new things if you can. A lot has to do with your good fortune in terms of health,
Right.
and your mobility, and what are you able to do and not able to do. And my thinking is that you have to adapt based on what you can really do. And then the next problem with that is you have to be willing to accept that. The willingness to accept the change is a big hurdle that a lot of people face.
Yeah. There's a notion in therapy called radical acceptance.
Yeah.
But once you accept your situations, it gives you also an avenue to change and to move forward, and to try new things. And I totally agree with you. It's something that's really valuable.
How long ago did you leave Newsday?
Well, I left there actually in 2005 because I was interested in this whole area, and I could see that, the newspaper industry is changing dramatically.
So you're like 20 years almost into Act 2.5.
Exactly.
2.0, 2.05.
Right. Yeah.
Ironically, around that time is when Project Independence was being first established as a NORC.
Right.
So, that was about 20 years. So we're hitting on that. When you were talking about, the next part of your life, I think this is the first time ever where we've had so many people in their 80s and 90s, which we talk about a lot on this show. Mm-hmm. So many people living, like when I was a child, not many of my friends' grandparents, no one really had grandparents in their 90s. And if they did, it was, wow, that's, really old. It is, people are driving in their 90s today. Right. And that's also a fast growing population. So, there's a lot of unknowns also, with people living well into their 90s and hundreds. We have one of our original Project Independence members with the NORC just had celebrated our 101st birthday, right? So there are unknowns to have so many people living so old, and maybe cognitively doing well, but our bodies are, not, are aging too. So I'm curious your experience or what you're seeing in that population in terms of caregiving.
Well, first of all, as you point out, the 85 plus population is actually the fastest growing demographic in the country, nationwide, and probably worldwide.
Yes.
So some of that is due to advances in wellness and health. So we are living longer. And I guess the key, as Otto pointed out, is sort of healthy aging. So people are finding ways earlier in life to maintain that health. But there are inevitable issues. And there are ways to deal with them too. So first of all, as you point out, Otto, you get up and you have a purpose to, being a radio show host. So we're finding that there are lots of things we do to stimulate ourselves cognitively and socially in terms of a sense of purpose that actually affect our health. We are healthier longer. And being able to recognize our limitations also enables us to kind of let go of things. I think the most difficult thing as we age is dealing with a sense of loss in life, which is inevitable. You lose friends, you lose family, people move away. So there is a lot of work being done now in the importance of social connection at every age, and especially as we get older. COVID really brought this out, right? When we were all isolated, and for seniors, it was deadly, and in some cases, literally deadly. They couldn't get help. They couldn't get, services. They couldn't get food. So it really focused on something that was there all along, which is the essence of social connection as we get older and how much that's part of our humanity. And that, affected people in nursing homes as well.
You know what we found too, is that for the seniors that were already kind of isolated or living alone, while we kind of learned new ways to deal, connect with our residents at home, our Project Independence members, whether it was through Zoom or calls or, check-ins, however it was, we also discovered ways to connect with people who we weren't connected with because they're not coming out, whether they saw a show on North Hempstead television, that we were doing an exercise show, and we would get calls saying, I didn't know anything about Project Independence, and and they didn't have computers, they still had only their television sets,
right?
So it connected them to us through just reaching out on television,
right?
If you look at it, what you talked about, Ron, is really handling of loss, whether the loss be a friend or a spouse or a physical ability, or maybe you have macular degeneration and you lost vision. Handling loss is much harder than handling good things.
Right.
And I don't know if there's a magic bullet to that. I think you really have to work at that. I don't think you can just say, okay, so I lost my good friend and it's over. I'm not sure what the magic answer is. I think, again, the adaptability factor, it's sad when you lose good friends.
Absolutely.
And it's another piece of your youth that goes away.
Right.
How many people, like in my case, I have two friends still that we were in the 6th grade together.
Right.
But that's it. And we would just talk, and we could have our 70th high school reunion, my friend and I.
Right.
Because how many other that was what would be this year.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, how many other people would be at this 70th reunion?
Yeah.
So you can't dwell on that, though. I think that's the bottom line. You have to be happy. You could be at the 70th reunion.
Absolutely. I had one of my guests on my show was a well-known New York Times reporter named John Leland, who wrote a book called "Happiness is a Choice You Make." And it was based upon, he got an assignment from one of his editors, about the fastest growing demographic, 85 plus. So they said, well, let's investigate it. So we ended up actually turned into a book with several a group of diverse 85 plus people about what their lives were like. And he discovered, thinking it was just going to be like, oh God, so hard, I'm losing this and I'm not feeling well. And some of them were dealing with these challenges, but they chose to live life with a sense of purpose and renewal. And so they accepted these limitations, but they said, well, I can still get up every day and make life what I want of it. So I think that there's a lesson in that for all of us, I think. And I think that, you can grow, you can learn. At the same time, you do need support. And coming full circle to Project Independence, I think that's what it's about. People want to age in place if they can. But when you do that, you do lose social connection. So, and you don't necessarily need more government services. What you need is a connective tissue in your community to go back to our old sense of community, which is that they're there, and government is a part of that, but so are nonprofits, so are your neighborhoods, and that's what NORCs are about. And they're incredibly valuable, and New York State in general is one of the leaders in the country in terms of providing naturally occurring retirement communities.
Well, to support that thinking, I've heard a lot of people say at Project Independence advisory meetings, and I'm one of them, that you really feel more part of the neighborhood, if you will, community, when you do participate in things like that. Prior to that, I moved into New Hyde Park at an age where our children were gone.
Right.
So what we have, they don't have welcome committees anymore, with the welcome kit and all that stuff that went out a long time ago. All right. So if you choose, again, you could just be isolated in your house and know nobody. And it's a choice, but if you make that choice, then the price you pay is a little heavier, I think, than somebody who tries to. You have to reach out. nobody knocking on the door,
Right.
usually.
Yeah. Yeah. But you can set up structures like NORCS, like Project Independence, where you say, you know what, we know what you need, and we want you here. I'm an active member. I'm on the executive council for the state AARP. And one of the things we talk about is this sense of connection and how we can support people when they want to age in place.
And we're just part of it too.
Right.
We're not everything. We have great resources and connections, and we do also provide certain services. But it's part of your toolbox.
Right.
And when you realize you have limits, and limits aren't bad necessarily. We have limits on everything, and when you kind of recognize they change over the years, you just kind of go into something else.
Yeah. When there are limits, you sort of know where you are. And then if you need to make adjustments, well, you know what alternatives you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. What like we talk all the time about as you get older, well, maybe take on a project of taking old photographs and identifying who all the people are. So future generations don't just throw them in the garbage or hang them up on a wall in a bar somewhere, as a token of the past.
Right.
There are things you can try to do that based on your own likes and dislikes.
Yeah. Well, we have to take a quick break. After the break, we will continue talking to Ron Roel, veteran writer, speaker, and radio show host. You're listening to Project Independence in You on LIU Public Radio.
Take WCWP with you wherever you go with the WCWP app. Listen live 24/7 to all of our streams, all from one app. Plus, call the studios directly from the app and visit our social media. Download the app through the iOS App Store on Apple devices or the Google Play Store on Android by searching WCWP Radio, or visit WCWP.org for links. The WCWP app, available now on iOS and Android devices.
Welcome back to Project Independence in You. I'm your host, Rebecca Miller, along with co-host Otto Lohse and show producer Kristina Lew. We're talking to Ron Roel, veteran writer, speaker, and radio show host, and also a great friend to Project Independence. This book, The Caregiver Navigator, it's all Long Island based, which is great. And I did see Project Independence in there, which I'm very happy about. So thank you for including us in there. So it's an incredible resource. Otto's holding it up for those of listening.
For the listeners.
For the listeners. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, and then also how people can get it?
Sure. Well, I decided to do the book several years ago. And like a lot of projects in life, they come from sort of personal interest and personal experience. So I started even getting a sense of this really as I was thinking backward to the 1990s when my dad unfortunately passed away suddenly. And I was one of four sons faced with, okay, my mother is independent, but I can see where things are going. So I started working in the first section of the book, like, how do you plan? How do you prepare? What do you need to do financially, in terms of insurance, in terms of health?
Mm-hmm.
So that got me going on this whole journey. And as I was going along and working in the Act Two space, I could see that there are more and more people who needed this. It's a nationwide issue. It's not just Long Island. But I felt that my first, cut at it would be Long Island, because also people wanted to get resources that were local if possible. So that's the design of the book was, okay, looking, even though I do get it that most people deal with caregiving for their loved ones in a crisis by crisis basis. And my intent was like, okay, how can we minimize that? How can we give people a sense of how to plan ahead to the extent that they can and are willing to? So the book is designed for the planning stage, and then it's aging in place independently. And then when your loved ones need some help at home but want to remain home, how do you do that? What are the resources? What are the questions you need to ask? What are the things you need to deal with as families? And then, if they really can't manage, they need to move to some supportive housing. And then dealing with chronic long-term care may be an issue. And then all the way through the end of life journey, which is not just about your funeral. It's about a whole chapter, again, a chapter of life at the end, where you have to deal with that. And as you pointed out, Otto, there's an issue of grieving. How do you move forward? So, and then in the final chapter, of course, is how do you care for yourself as a caregiver? This is what people are finding, that there's incredible stress. There's financial stress, there's emotional stress, there's practical stress. So the main thing is, and to use a long used analogy of, the flight attendant, right? When the oxygen mask drops, you put it on yourself first. And that's the thing about caregiving. You've got to do that first to make sure you're okay.
I know a whole bunch of situations right now that are in rocky condition between parents and their adult children. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking the main reason it's like that is they never talked about what it is that might happen. It's like, let's ignore that like it'll never happen. It will happen.
Right.
So,
right.
You want to make life a little easier
Right.
when it does happen, talk about it.
Right.
And that's your book, by the way. I'm not on commission. People should know. But I think this is an excellent guide. It's like 100 and whatever number of pages, 200 pages, but it's well written and it's organized in a way that you can easily go to whatever part might be relevant to you.
Right.
Right. And I'm going to just one other thought before I lose track. The book comes in two versions, as I understand it. One of them is it's like a Kindle book, if you will. It's on your website, which
Right.
you can talk about.
Sure.
And then the other one is an actual print copy of the
Right.
book.
Right.
And I think you can use both together, my opinion.
Yeah.
My wife actually, she looked at this book and she said, geez, I wish maybe you could cut pages out or whatever.
Well,
But I said, well, then you can go to the website and print the checklists off that you want and use the checklists.
Right. Yeah. So it is designed exactly, Otto. So I have a website, caregivingnav.com. The full title is not, someone has it, it's not using it. But so it's not a full version of the book, but it has it breaks it out like that. So there's a resources tab. You can go and you can print out different checklists. So you can use the website as in conjunction with the book. And the reason I have it, a couple of reasons. One is some people prefer that. Also, things change. So I can make the changes and resources, whatever, on the website quicker, and people can get the updates there.
Right.
Now, that said, I am doing annual editions of the book to update the book itself. One of the reasons is because I've found that in spite of our digital age, many people, and especially caregivers, actually prefer to have this in front of them. Caregivers like something in print. And I know this because AARP has done surveys about this among caregivers.
Well, I can understand that because if you look at the front of your book, it's talking about all kinds of different things and planning, different parts of it that relate to Medicare, financial, long-term care, whatever. You can browse through and pick out what might be relevant at the moment.
Right.
This is not like a novel.
Right. That's right.
It's a reference book, really.
Right. And it's of a certain size. It's 8.5 by 11, so that you could lay it flat. That's what I wanted to make. So you can really make copies easily. And I encourage people to do that. I'm not, you can get it on Amazon. It's a Caregiving Nav. You can actually go to caregivingnav.com, my website, and direct click and buy it there. But I don't, I want it to be fairly reasonable. I mean, it's $24.95. It's a lot of work, as you point out. It's actually almost 300 pages. So, it's a question of, as people say, I mean, it's my project it's my project to remain independent in my retirement years. And people say, well, are you a nonprofit? And I'm like, I'm a not much profit. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of value to it, but I want people to really use it and make use of it.
Well, actually, I'm going to get a couple of copies for my own adult children.
Sure.
We do talk because of my exposure to Project Independence.
Yeah.
We have talked many times about possibilities and
Right.
options and
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah, and these family. So at the beginning of each section, there's about having a family conversation, as you point out. It's different in each chapter, so things change. You need to keep doing that, and they're not easy. So I make no bones about it. A lot of these conversations, you really need to work at it. In certain cases, I give certain suggestions for when to do it, how to do it, what questions to ask, what things to be sensitive about. I think that the most difficult issues are often with adult children who are trying to take care of their parents, but need to really also think about your parents have their own ideas about how two sides.
Right.
And then, of course, you expand it more complication with your siblings, right? Then your siblings have all sorts of ideas that may not coincide.
But even there, I mean, you say family conversation. Like in my case, I'm an only child. My mother lived with us for 11 years. I had to talk. I was the one who had to do it all.
Right.
All right. Maybe that's easier because I'm not conflicting with myself.
Right.
If you have 4 siblings, they're guaranteed. I have 6 in my own end. I guarantee you they don't all think the same.
Right.
Right. Now, the other part of it, though, is there are people who do not have family. And that's where things like Project Independence definitely come in.
Exactly.
With their circle of support idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you going to do if you don't have a family?
Yeah. This is a significant issue. People think, well, and that's one of the problems. We sort of design a lot of our services assuming families, but I think it's actually about a third of the U.S. population is aging alone. They call them solo agers, and this really is an issue. So having something like Project Independence is really critical as a support system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that we talk a lot about too, in terms of caregivers, is that sometimes people don't identify as a caregiver. They don't recognize themselves as someone who is, someone's primary caregiver. They're the spouse, they're the child, and that there are services. There's respite care for caregivers. There's all kinds of things to help caregivers. Do you find that when you speak to people and they say, oh, I'm doing this for my husband, partner may have Alzheimer's or some kind of disease requiring caregiver, and the person is like their primary, and they just don't
identify.
They don't identify as it. We actually have to take a break. After the break, we'll continue speaking with Ron Roel, veteran writer, speaker, and radio show host. You're listening to Project Independence in You on LIU Public Radio.
WCWP is your home for great music and great conversation. You'll find all that and more on WCWP.org. Listen live on the web, check out the lineup, subscribe to podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest station events. Get in touch with us and let us know if you like what you're hearing. And find out how you can support or get involved at the only community public radio station serving Nassau's North Shore. Plus, sign up to get a free bumper sticker. It's all online at WCWP.org.
I'm your host, Rebecca Miller, along with my co-host, Otto Lohse, and show producer, Kristina Lew. We're talking to Ron Roel, veteran writer, speaker, and radio show co-host. Before break, we're speaking a lot about caregivers, but also being recognized as a caregiver. And it doesn't mean that you're 24/7. You could be somebody who works and comes home, and instead of relaxing and having a meal, you're taking care of someone else in the family. So the other thing you were talking about, Otto, is kind of knowing that this type of book exists means that there are services out there that you should really try to get knowledge of, because we only really hear people when they're in those situations. It's somebody falls, they you don't have access to the house, they go to the hospital, they can't come home, they don't have a ramp, the family doesn't know what to do, they live in a different part of the country, so it's really good to kind of plan. That's what Project Independence is about. I know you talk about it all the time. Planning is so important. I had a friend call me from high school. She knew on Facebook what I did for a living. This just happened a few days ago. A family member was falling. Every time she fell, she would call her father, who's also older, and he'd rush to her aunt, his sister's house, and then 911 would come, and it was just this whole setup. And, and I talked to her, I gave her all the information I could possibly give her. Unfortunately, the aunt doesn't live in North Hempstead, but, we don't turn people away. So I just kind of went over all the things that she should do, get a good checkup from the doctor, get thoroughly evaluated. Why is she falling? It could be a host of reasons. It could be temporary. It could be swollen feet. It could be medication. There's so many things. So until you really know, it's not safe for her to live alone. So it's just really kind of gather up information now. I am, from when we did that Access to Home program with United Way many, many years ago, I learned a lot. It was about 17 years ago, and they wanted to help people with disabilities and older residents make their homes accessible. I mean, they couldn't go in and change the house, but they could put in grab bars. They would go in and look at the house back in the day and say, you've got these throw rugs, you've got lamps, you have all this stuff on the top shelf. Anything that requires you to climb on a ladder or use a chair, get rid of. Just get rid of it. So I changed all that too in my own home. And, my mother has too. And that whole concept of main level living, Otto, we talk a lot about just taking away any reason to go downstairs or upstairs, especially if you live alone. So all these things I'm doing, I recently, I splurged. I made sure my windows are tight, my roof is, working well. We replaced some of it because you don't want to be in that position when you are in part 3 or 4, where you have to go out and get contractors for a new roof or windows. So just keep it up as it is. So I'm learning. I mean, I'm in the business though. So the seniors that are listening, try to pick up this book. Always you can call 311. You can call Project Independence. We have nurses and social workers, people that can help connect, and the other you kind of talking about too. People don't really think about going to government we're not a human service department.
Charity.
And that was the other thing I wanted to ask you is the other thing is the older generation. And I have to say it's not as much in my generation and younger, but they hate to ask for help. It's like, I don't want to bother. It's like, but like, that book, was it the New York Times writer?
Happiness is a choice.
Happiness is a choice. You got to take care of yourself too. I mean, if you don't ask. So I'm curious, in your experience, I know that you knew what I was talking about because you're shaking your head. They don't want to ask for help. And it's not like you're saying, I need help on everything. You're just finding out information.
Yeah. It's true on multiple levels. I mean, first of all, you do have, in my parents' generation, exactly. It's like, the independent American. You're like, no, I can take care of myself. So in one of my early family conversation scenarios in the book, I posed the question: if you ask your parents, "How are you doing?" and they say, "We're fine," they're not generally, there are all these emotional things, and so there are things like, okay, first of all, I don't want to burden my children. That's a big one. I don't want to be a burden to my children. Never mind that they want you took care of them. They want to take care of you. So, but they don't want to do that. They don't want to feel that. Sometimes there are financial issues and sensitivities. And some parents are like, well, I don't want to share that financial information with my kids. I don't know what they want to do with it. You know what? That's private. So the issue of privacy is big, I think, with previous generations. Even among, it was a gender issue. My parents split responsibilities like a lot of spouses, but my mother took care of all the practical budgeting. My father took care of the investments, although my mother was like, well, I'd like to know about it, but they never did share. And so when my dad passed, I had to sort of sort things out and really, bring my mother into it. This is what we got. This is what you need to know. Bring in help when you need it. But it's complicated. As you were pointing out, Rebecca, there are so many dimensions to it. Going back to your first question about people identifying as caregivers, especially among older generations and among, first generation Americans, immigrants. Some of them don't even have a word for caregiver. It says, yeah, I'm the daughter, I'm the husband. What are you talking about? In America, we have a mobile society. So what's happened is that starting with, previous generations, you told your kids, go out and be fruitful and do whatever you want, go wherever you want. You could be anything you want. That's great until you're in your 80s and it's like, where are my kids? I need help. And so we've created a society in which we do need to figure out roles of caregiving. And they can be very diverse. And they, as you pointed out, they change over time. So initially, maybe your mom needs help, reconfiguring the house so they don't fall, because that's the most dangerous thing as people get older, falls. But then it's like, well, how do you progress from Medicare to maybe Medicaid? What do you need there? And so you go from a role as just, helping around the house, driving to doctor's appointments, to being a broader caregiver, and you need to bring in partners. So there's a whole term now of care partnering. You're just not, where you need to recognize you're part of a team of family members, professionals, doctors, sometimes social workers, sometimes, social service agencies. And that's what you need, to use that old phrase, which is, long preceded her, Hillary, that it takes a village.
Right.
And it does. It took a village before she mentioned it, and it still takes a village.
Yeah.
It's so complicated. I flashing back now, thinking about things, and like my mother, when she first moved with us, she was able, all right, and then a little bit there, a little bit here, falls a few times, slight stroke, and the next thing you know, you're at a point where you have to have people come in.
Right.
We were both working at the time, my wife and I, and then the next thing you know, you need a little more than that. Can't handle the personal needs. So then I got into, I can't run for political office because we had people coming in from Jamaica, the island of Jamaica,
right,
who would live in, and they had a whole group. One would come and spend 6 months, the next one, and fine. They were beautiful people. They were dedicated, and we happened to be able to, at the time, afford it.
Right.
All right. It wasn't through an agency. It was an out-of-pocket proposition, right. True confessions.
Sure.
So, but then I think what has to be thought about is the reality when you get to a point where it's no longer good for the person or the caregivers for that person to be at home. I think there is a reality that has to be addressed also. When you get to where you need 24/7, and in my case, my mother needed a Hoyer lift for her to get her out of bed, and everything had to be done. You're at the point where you really need people around you. And frankly, the word nursing home comes into play. All right. And you made a comment that your options for long-term care are not great. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of people have had negative experiences.
Yeah.
What's your view on that end of the spectrum?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a whole area that's in flux now. Yes, when my mother was getting older, there was a sense that my mother literally said, "Don't you ever put me in a nursing home."
Right.
And so, but a lot of things are happening. There's been a lot of attention on nursing homes, and sadly, a lot of that was brought about by COVID. Right. A lot of seniors died in nursing homes, so it was really emotionally traumatic. During that whole period, family members could not see their loved ones. So, and I'm working with there are a number of long-term care coalitions, and there are a number of advocates who are working on this issue and what the problems are. So the main problem is a structural one that's not going to be an easy fix. And that is that nursing homes were basically structured, designed in the post-war period on a hospital model,
right?
As patients. They're not really homes. They're hospitals. Yeah,
you sit outside your room in a wheelchair with everybody else.
Exactly.
Because everybody there gets in a wheelchair.
Yeah, but people now are realizing this is not a home. This is we're all getting older. And when you go into a nursing home, a lot of times you can take care of people at home, but then their medical needs are such that you can't get coverage at home. So that's the source That's the only resource you have. That said, there are many things we can do. We can make them more homes. We can make a lot of people in the industry are looking at how do you make a smaller scale model, not bigger. How do you make them smaller scale? How do you make sure that people have, so COVID spread so quickly because, I mean, as one nursing home operator told me, he said, you couldn't have a worse design for infectious disease spread than nursing homes. Your people are sharing rooms, they're sharing bathrooms, they're sharing showers. And then the other thing is that you're not paying the staff that well. So a lot of the COVID was spread because the staff were working in 3 or 4 jobs to make a living. And so there are lots of things you could do to redesign the system. And this is going to be long term. But I think it will happen because we're all getting older. And one of the things that we realize is that, we need to age with dignity, safety, security, and dignity. And that's not a dignified way to age. When you're alone like that, when you're just basically, people are just taking care of you.
To be cold about it, you're almost like a piece of meat.
So there's a stigma
exactly
to going into a nursing home. It's a lot uglier since COVID, and people generally go there, and the lifespan is maybe 18 months to 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because a nursing home, the difference is you need a skilled level
Correct.
of medical support. You have assisted living, you have, you could start out in those like levels where you kind of start out not needing anything, and then it
Correct.
goes up and up the ladder. But then when you come into that point where you're unable to care for yourself, nursing home just has such a terrible stigma. But COVID, even though it was horrible what happened, it did bring out a lot of the
Right.
issues, and that, we have to be more careful when people are sharing a room or sharing a bathroom. I mean, in general, you're talking staph infections,
Right.
things like that too. So hopefully there's going to be lessons learned.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, it's that level of care,
Right.
when you go into a nursing home. And you're right, it's the connotation is negative. It's not really what it's actually. You're going into a hospital.
That's right.
You're really essentially going into a long-term hospital scenario.
Right. Yeah. But the good news is that people are working on these issues.
Yes.
We
Yes.
tend to only hear about the bad stuff happening, but so I'm now on the board of the Gray Panthers NYC, and one of their major issues, and they actually have once a month, the last Tuesday of the month, they have Transformation Tuesdays. And it's basically a webinar with real experts on the subject from every conceivable way, including we had one person last week who worked on Swiss nursing homes, and then next week there's a Dutch person. So there's a lot of stuff happening. There are people working on this issue, and I think that even we're trying different models of so some of the people now are saying, well, how much of medical services can we realistically bring to the home? People are realizing there's even sort of a micro movement among doctors who are doing more home visits again,
yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They realize, well, that's where the market is, and in terms of efficiency, it's a lot more efficient in some cases to bring the services to the senior than to get them to come into the offices. So I just want people to really, I do want people to stress the positive. Stress of what people are doing to solve the problems, not just say, "Oh my gosh."
Well, people like you and programs like Project Independence,
Right.
Programs that are geared to helping people stay home safely. But what like we kind of started talking at is you have to kind of not just ask for help, but maybe ask for information.
Right.
That there is information out there.
Right.
People, some of it's common sense. And you just have to be reminded, like, do you want to actually fall off a step stool at home and you're alone, you're a perfectly healthy person, just like the simple stuff to, just asking for help and finding the resources out there.
Right. Yeah. Some of these are just larger, kind of cultural shifts we're going through.
Yeah.
So going back to what you were starting before about our population is aging. We're all getting older. In many cases, we're getting older, healthier. So there are just many more of us. And I think there's also, we talked about the word stigma. I think
Yeah.
that's an important word. So there's a subtle stigma to getting older.
Yeah. Oh, we
And-
talk
and-
about that a lot.
Right. So that's,
Yes.
okay, ageism, whatever you want to, but, and so our approach previously for many generations, well, these older people all have similar problems, so we'll just put them off together and
Right.
we'll basically silo them. And I think but the shift is what I call sort of back to the future. That's not what we did years ago. Elders were part of a community. They were part of families. Look, things have changed, but we can replicate that. We can recognize that one of the things that older people still want is to be an integral part of our communities.
Yeah, they
That's
don't
what
want to be
Project Independence
invisible.
does. Would
Right.
it?
They do not want to be invisible.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And they feel invisible. And you know who else feels invisible? Their caregivers,
Right.
right?
right.
Especially as, I'm a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association also. And one of the things you find, especially for Alzheimer's caregivers, they totally feel invisible. They don't want to, they feel like their friends don't come around. They don't,
And the crazy thing is now getting older, we're the majority of the population. So where is the voice? How do we get the voice? We're consumers, we travel, we eat out. We don't just want a early bird special. I mean, we
Yeah.
want to dine and see our family. So I think that there should be more of a voice for the older population because we are the consumers, and really the older population still have money too, and not just about their health, but it's about socialization and life and all that. Yet, it's very hard to find a store that has stuff geared for the older population,
Right.
or, you feel like you walk into a restaurant if you're a little bit older. I mean, I'm not at that point
Right,
yet.
yeah.
But I do recognize that from my mom and I are very close. We go out to lunch. I'll go to a doctor with her. They talk to me. And let me tell you, my mother's 110% there,
Right. No.
and it's very insulting because, she's cognitively there and she gets around and she drives. But for some reason, I don't know that it has a lot to do with our culture too. Because I know in other cultures, Kristina shaking her head, they kind of revere their older population.
I believe younger generations have to be educated on the fact that they will get older. I do with my grandchildren all the time. I tell them so-and-so just was 28 or whatever. I said, do you know I was 28 once?
Right.
And I asked them, I said, do you think I know more now than when I was 28? And I make a point of bringing that up a lot of times. All right. But my point being, I think that younger generations, like you hear politicians, it's not a political show, but talk about killing Social Security or whatever like it's nothing. Well, that's because they don't think they're ever going to get there, or maybe they're rich enough that it doesn't matter. But, I believe the younger breed, like we happen to have two real exceptions in this room. Kristina and Rebecca. Kristina, since she's a kid, has always had acknowledgement and a respect for the fact of older people because of her relationship with her grandfather.
Right.
Not every younger person is in that category. They look at older people and say, "Oh, he's a old person." Well, yeah, that's true.
I wonder, Otto, not to interrupt, but I think that because we were talking about this earlier, how so many families are living together now. I have my mother and I share a home. She has her own apartment. My kids were growing up with her. She had a lot of friends, and I feel like in those scenarios are very good. Those multi-generational.
Yes.
kind of growing
Which
up.
is how many families did live years
Right.
ago.
Yeah.
You had more sharing of homes, two-family homes, mother-daughter homes. A lot of areas out here, it's like, we don't want that in our neighborhood. We don't want houses where you can have an apartment
Right.
and maybe share it with your family.
Yeah. Yeah. I think things are changing slightly, Otto.
Well, I
But
keep
slowly.
reading that is,
Right.
there's more positive comments
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
we do need to have those kinds of things.
I think it changes when you have personal experiences.
Yes.
So I think what people in your field can do is to basically see if there are ways to create those experiences. So, so designing multi-generational housing is one of them. Having conversations, I'm in Glen Cove, and I think there's a great senior center there. There are a lot of great senior centers. One of the programs they have there is they have intergenerational programs, and sometimes it's as simple as having younger people sit down across from older people and sharing stereotypes about each other, because it goes both ways, right? It goes, older people have stereotypes about younger people, like, oh, all you do is you're on social media. You don't care about this. You don't care about anything, not true. But you really have to find ways to put people in other people's shoes and share experiences. And even, again, it's not to get political, but a lot of I think those differences too are because people are not sharing each other's lives. They don't see what your concerns are, what upsets you, what you want in life, what you want for your kids. In many cases, you're like, oh, we want the same things, we have different approaches to it, but we do want the same things. And I think that, again, so in terms of ageism, one of the things I'm very passionate about is trying to break down these generational divisions as if, so when you're helping seniors, you're helping everybody. You are helping with the stresses of multi-generational families. You're helping with the finances, because in some cases, older people need to take care of younger people financially until they get on their feet.
Or the other way around.
Right. So it's collaborative, and it's crosses over generational lines.
You're bringing up some great point there, because it's also the other way around. Like, to maybe because of these intergenerational chats, you may understand the teenagers a lot better also. So kind of a mutual respect could be built, older, younger, and then in the middle,
Yeah. Well, as you pointed out just a few minutes ago, Otto, it's like you're educating the younger generation, like, this is stuff you're looking on for me will be for you in a few years. So one of the things that we've learned in ARP is, there's big advocates for Social Security, and, and not cutting it, recognizing Americans paid for this, this is what we worked for, number one. So is there a problem? Yeah, there's a problem. In 10 years, if we don't make certain fixes, it won't be sustainable in its current form. There will be cuts. So what do we do, and why is it important? And I remember, we had a session at Hofstra, where we had, ARP tables talking to college students. And at first they were like, well, okay, why should I be caring about this? And it's like, well, do you understand that many families, Social Security is their main means of support as they get older? And if you cut this, guess who's going to have to support their parents? You.
Right.
So it's like you have a vested interest in this, in making sure that this system is sound, is basically on solvent footage. I'm not saying we don't make any changes. We're going to have to make some changes, but get involved in what kinds of changes make sense for people now and for you in the future.
It's a complicated proposition. I mean, your book is, if you learned everything in this book, you'd be, very valuable commodity.
Yeah.
And you have learned a lot of what's in this book.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing.
Well, education is the key,
Definitely.
Knowledge is the key, and then, once you have the knowledge in the book, then you've got to put it to use. And it doesn't mean, so about this, but then you still need to know about project independence. You need to make the call and become a member, and then engage with people. So the human element is still essential.
I mean, I have almost 20 years involved. I was involved with the NORC in the beginning, and what I have learned personally is I hardly even imagine what I learned. And you try to tell people, and you try to work with people, and there's still this stigma where it's like, okay, I know I'm wasting my time talking to you because this isn't going to go anywhere. So I think there's a certain percentage of the population that you just can't do anything to help or do anything with.
Ron, thank you so much for talking to us today. It was great to hear about, your lengthy career and everything you're doing for caregiving. It's so important. I know we're going to have you back.
Okay, great.
I do want to thank you again so much, and we'll definitely have you back. I also want to thank our listeners and watchers for being part of our program. You're listening to Project Independence in You on LIU Public Radio.